Hi guys! In this episode, we'll see how the African American music scene developed in the United States after the turn of the century. In the first decade of the 20th century, sheet music became cheaper due to new ways to print on paper. At this time, the record industry also began to develop, even though records were not the prime product, but were mostly released to increase sheet music sales. The music sheet business became so big that by 1910, Tin Pan Alley was selling millions of dollars worth of sheet music every year, and around that time, ragtime replaced the ballad as their most marketable product. One example is the song Alexander's Ragtime Band, published in 1911 by Irving Berlin, a Jewish songwriter from Eastern Europe who worked in Tin Pan Alley. Meanwhile, jazz was still in its early form. In 1904, Creole pianist Jelly Roll Morton was 14 when he began playing piano in brothels in New Orleans. Morton was a pivotal figure in early jazz, and his Jelly Roll Blues, published in 1915, is thought to be the first published jazz composition. 2 years later, in 1917, the all-white original Dixieland Jazz Band from New Orleans recorded the first jazz song, Livery Stable Blues. This Dixieland style of jazz had the distinctive characteristic of collective improvisation, where one instrument, usually the trumpet, plays the melody and the other instruments of the front line improvise around that melody. Later in the 20s, Louis Armstrong developed the idea of musicians playing during breaks that expanded into musicians playing individual solos. Now, let's see what was happening in blues music around that time. One of the first popular bluesmen was Blind Lemon Jefferson, the father of Texas blues. Just like many of the first performers in the blues, Jefferson was blind. He began playing guitar in the late 1900s and soon after started performing in picnics and parties. In the early 1910s, he was traveling frequently to Dallas, where he met another important country blues artist, Lead Belly. Huddy William Ledbetter, best known as Lead Belly, played with Jefferson and spent time with him as a lead man. Performers like Jefferson and Lead Belly grew out of the songster and string band tradition, and in their way of thinking, they were songsters, not bluesmen. In addition to the blues style, songsters sang folk ballads, work songs, hymns, ragtime, minstrel and coon songs, waltzes, dance songs, their version of the popular tunes of the day, or any tune that would put money into their pockets. Occasionally, they would even make up their own songs. With the exception of the blues, their repertoire was more or less identical to that of rural white performers. Most of these songsters accompanied themselves with a guitar, mainly because it was easy to travel with. Piano wasn't a frequent instrument in the South, and only mid-class had them. Songs were handed down orally from one singer to the other, and most of them gradually wove their own songs from a body of traditional lyrics. The blues were performed in a variety of contexts: streets, fields, picnics, juke joints, barrel houses, logging camps, dance halls, brothels, cabarets, vaudeville shows, circuses, tent shows, medicine shows, prisons, war camps, parties, song festivals, contests, in private, and so on and so forth. Later, they were also performed for folk song collectors, radio, and of course recording studios. Well, Delta blues wasn't the only style of blues music in that era. Vaudeville blues was another early form of blues performed mostly by women in front of a small jazz ensemble or piano. Western conventions made this style more palatable for white audiences because of the way it resembled popular white forms of music. The genre is generally considered to have begun in 1902 when Ma Rainey began incorporating blues songs into her vaudeville routines. It wasn't until 1923, though, that she made her first recording in Chicago. The first female singer to be recorded was Mamie Smith in 1920, with her hit Crazy Blues. Columbia Records, in search of female blues singers like Mamie Smith, signed her peer Bessie Smith in 1923, launching her recording career with Downhearted Blues, another big hit. She became a headliner on the vaudeville circuit and rose to become its top attraction in the 20s. Other important vaudeville blues figures were Memphis Minnie, who was performing in Beale Street since 1910, and Ethel Waters, who recorded her first record in 1921. Vaudeville blues in the 20s also acted as a foot in the door for other blues artists to be recorded. So, how did the blues get their 12-bar form that we all know? Well, blues didn't have exclusively a 12-bar structure. There were often 8 bars or 16 bars. Even 7, 10, or 14-bar blues have been made. The first 12-bar blues was published in 1908 by Anthony Maggio, but what helped crystallize the 12-bar form was the famous Memphis Blues by W.C. Handy in 1912. Handy was an educated black trumpetist and band leader who, as is widely known, had heard a Delta blues guitarist 10 years earlier, inspiring him to compose blues songs. In 1914, he also published St. Louis Blues, another 12-bar blues and one of the first blues songs to succeed as a pop song. These and some other 12-bar songs that were recorded in the 1910s ended up being very successful, and so it came to be the only type of song that companies were willing to record in that era. The next generation of blues musicians, who often learned their craft from recordings, began to imitate that form, producing more and more 12-bar blues. Okay, that's all for now. In the next video, we'll talk about the music landscape in the 20s. Keep in touch!